You know, everyone wants to know who is the best of the best. Like, who's the equivalent of Mr. Olympia? Much like the Olympics every 4 years, is that particular federation, is it less prestigious than having an invitation-only type of event like you're suggesting? I think if you were going to get a true super show, I would actually say the most fun I had in bodybuilding was probably the first half of my career, because that's when you're climbing and that's when the challenge is there, and that's fun. Once you get to the top, okay, it's great because you've achieved what you wanted to achieve and you're winning all the shows. But put it this way, the first time you win the worlds is always going to be the best because you've achieved what you want to achieve. Thereafter, it doesn't quite last as long. You know, that feeling, that good feeling doesn't quite last as long.
So obviously the first time you won worlds, it was like this massive high, and then what, it just didn't last as long, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, the first time is always going to be the best. I think anyone it doesn't have to be bodybuilding. It's any sort of goal you have. The first time you achieve it is always like you finally climb to the top of the mountain. And then thereafter, the perspective changes because you're no longer underdog. You're not trying to win anything. You're effectively just trying to retain what you already have. So it's a different pressure. The actual feeling of winning isn't so much specifically that you've won. It's more that you've just survived. You know, you've hung on to what you already have. Therefore, the feeling afterwards of accomplishment isn't quite the same. It passes quicker. And I don't think that's specific to me as a person. I just think that's the way we are as people. We'll always experience that. And that's why I think I did everything I wanted to in bodybuilding, in the sense that I won all I needed to win. To keep winning thereafter wasn't worth it anymore. People always say, have you really retired? And I think I'll never say never, because I've said that before. But certainly the last time I competed, yes, I won the show. And it was a great event, don't get me wrong. It was worth it. But feeling of elation and accomplishment, it didn't justify the restriction on my life anymore. That's the only way I can explain it. Because you're not winning anything you've not won before. That's effectively it. You need to sort of create other triggers, other motivations as to why you want to keep competing. And you have to do that as a champion, because inevitably just winning it isn't enough anymore. You have to almost like find another reason to keep going. But, you know, eventually you get to the point where, I hate to use the word bored, but I did almost at the end feel a little bored of the repetitive cycle that I was doing. I needed something new. Changing career came at the perfect time for me, because I wasn't particularly satisfied in the job I was doing before. I was doing a lecturing role before. That wasn't enough for me. It'll be no surprise to you, Kenny, that I wouldn't say I'm an adrenaline junkie, not by any means, but I need something up here to aspire to and to chase. Otherwise, I just don't have a motivation to do it. I'm a kind of all or nothing type guy. I'm either all in or I'm not in at all. For bodybuilding, I very much know what it takes to be where I've been before and to do what I did. I know what it takes, and I'm not sure whether I really want to do that anymore. You know, it doesn't mean I wouldn't do it again, but the motivation needs to be there.
That makes sense. I find that maybe it was a way to cope through the pandemic, but I found that people were discrediting motivation, like on social media and whatnot, and saying it's not about motivation, it's about discipline. But my thoughts have changed on that. Motivation is extremely important. And the more...
They both...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry. They both have their place. The simplest way I can explain it is, I have the discipline within me to do another bodybuilding prep. That'll never leave me. That is part of who I am. But you need to be motivated to want to do that, to want to put yourself in that place. And once I'm in that place, the discipline's there anyway. It's intrinsic. It's not something that comes and goes. But motivation does come and go. I get how some people try to discredit it, you know, as almost like, oh, it's a fleeting feeling and it doesn't mean anything, but both have their place. So, yeah.
I agree with that. I think many who are listening as well can relate with that as well.
Yeah.
I wonder if there was like a show that popped up that kind of intrigued you that you haven't won yet, that maybe all of a sudden you get that itch and you're like, oh, for some reason, but I don't know, maybe it runs deeper than that for you.
I got to the end of my career. In fact, my entire pro career, there was always, could we make it happen? Could all the feds get together? Could we create a super show? And I've talked about this a lot. I've talked about this on various podcasts, that the idea was always branded around it. Even if we didn't have one fed like the IFBB had, like the IFBB, it has the Olympia. Even if we didn't have that, we could have had the major natural bodybuilding federations host the World Championships every year. So it would move around. and everyone would go there and just adhere to the rules, the drug testing procedures of that particular federation, and they couldn't complain, and it is what it is. But the problem with that, Kenny, inevitably, is that even if you get the majority of the guys together, there's always going to be a few guys who don't compete for whatever reason. They take a couple of years out, they may be injured. Everyone wants to know who is the best of the best. Like, who's the equivalent of Mr. Olympia? I don't think even having the Super Show would silence those sorts of questions. I think the nature of the sport is simply that. Much like boxing and things, everyone can't fight everyone and everyone can't compete against everyone, but we can do a better job than has been done. What I would say in Europe has managed to galvanise. Europe is putting together big shows, and there's more structure there, and the top European guys can go head to head with very few people sitting out. So could you get it worldwide? I don't think so. I think we would have done it already, but it would have been a big pull for me. Could they have sorted that out in the last couple of years? But it's just not happening. And I think I've said in podcasts before that a lot of the guys who I consider to be in the discussion for being the best, a lot of these guys are transitioning out of bodybuilding now. They've been at the top. I wouldn't say they're all retired. They're potentially like me. They're not really that too fussed about competing anymore. They're doing their own thing. So I think if you were going to get a true Super Show, you would have had to have done it 3 or 4 years ago. We're in a bit of a lull at the moment where there's a lot of young guys that are coming up through the ranks. So maybe in another 4 or 5 years' time, it'll be ripe for another Super Show. But at the moment, I don't think that the balance is quite there. That's my opinion.
No, I think many share your opinion on that, because it would basically be, if I have this right, where you take the winner or maybe top 2 or top 3, let's say the gold medalists from the Natural Olympia, from Worlds, from maybe the Mr. America, from the Yorton Cup, DFAC Worlds, you take them all,
yep.
And you have them compete in one Super Show kind of thing. Is that the idea?
Well, that's the only way you could do it. Or alternatively, as I was saying, I maybe didn't explain myself quite well enough. What you could do is you could have, let's just say, each year, it doesn't matter whether it's the DFAC Worlds or WNBF or the Yorton Cup, that show will already be in the calendar. It'll already be planned. The show's going to go ahead anyway, much like the Olympics every 4 years. Does that particular federation, whatever that may be, do they host the Super Show? Do they just run the Worlds as they would? But invited. Of course, what that also means is, well, what do the other feds do with their sort of flagship show that year? Have to almost surrender their show for that year to push all their athletes to the other show. That's perhaps actually logistically an easier way of doing it. But As I said, is it less prestigious than having an invitation only type of event like you're suggesting? Possibly. But ultimately, people need to want it. And I've found over the course of the years, Kenny, that a lot of people talk a good game and they say they want this, but when the invitation's there, they don't pick it up. But that's a different matter entirely. And I don't want to go down that road right now, but if you wanted to discuss it, we could. But
that's super interesting, that topic, because it is then you're tapping into the ego and then why people compete in certain organizations, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And maybe there's organizations, their drug testing protocols are not as legit as other organizations. So now we're getting into a whole can of potential concerns or issues.
These are discussions that we've had for decades. I mean, I've been competing as a pro since 2010, but I've been involved in the sport from about 2006 onwards. And there's always a new wave of promoters or athletes that come along and they think they have the answers. I'm like, I've seen it all before. You're saying the same thing we said 10 years ago. I genuinely believe, Kenny, that unless there was just simply one federation, I don't think we can truly have the equivalent Super Show. I don't think we can.
Having been involved in the actual competitive side, I think everybody's got the idea and whatnot, but when it comes into putting it into practice, then you really see what's possible and what isn't.
Yeah, there are many reasons. I don't want to point the finger and suggest people dodge shows or have tactical years out or things like that. But also the problem is with natural bodybuilding, it's not our careers competing anyway. Competing's not our careers. That's not how we earn our money. I was even criticised in the past for not doing durations, but my argument was, look, I live in the UK, I work, have a set amount of holidays per year. I logistically cannot fly out to 3 or 4 different competitions in the US and compete in all of them just to appease the fans. I can't do that. Unless they're paying for it, I can't do that. I understand. I was frustrated. I would have loved to have had one federation. I would have rather have had never been a world champion, but only competed in one show. You know, like legitimately knowing exactly where I stood, hierarchy of natural bodybuilding. But that's just not the way the landscape was.
What would you say motivates you now to train at this point?
I just love it. I love it, Kenny. It's a habit. Habit's not a good word to use, actually, because habit suggests that it's something that's just mundane and in the background. I love training. I love going to the gym. I still train, largely speaking, I still train in exactly the same fashion with the same movements and the same routine as I did in all my competitive days, which is why, should I wish to return to stage, certainly probably the next few years, I could quite easily do it. I would just have to do a contest diet. So in terms of motivation, it's 2 hours out of my day that I look forward to every single day. It's in me. It's part of who I am. It keeps me feeling good. It keeps me looking good. It keeps me looking the way I want to when I finish work. In fact, when I'm at work, I still sit and think about the session I've got and how much I'm looking forward to it. Let's not complicate the matter. It's simply for the fact that I love to train. And you'll find that, to put the competitive hat back on the discussion again, all the guys top of the sport would say the same thing. They're champions because they love to train, because it's the journey, it's the steps along the way that make you a champion. If you don't love just getting your hands calloused and putting some heavy iron on your back, you know, you're never going to win anything. So I just love it, yeah.
That I expected as an answer, because I think what you just mentioned there, anybody who's not really loving the training part and is just after the silverware, they're in and out of this and probably not getting very far, if at all, doing anything respectable in the on the competitive side, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've always had that viewpoint. I never understood people's obsession with wanting to compete if they didn't actually love training, because, hate to break it to you guys, but competitive bodybuilding is not an easy journey. So if you don't love the hard stuff, forget about it. We all know, because of social media and things, that's why there's this compulsion to compete all the time. But you're right, they don't last, and they're in and out of the sport, generally with having done very little to make an impact.
Right. And also, I think you're right about the social media thing, because people, I think it's like an ego thing. They want to show, oh, I did this,
Sure.
I did this, I look a certain way. But if you're not enjoying it or loving it along the way, take away all that for a second. Just take away all the social media, all the silver.
Yeah.
Who's training and who isn't. That's it right there.
Correct. I always say, if social media, I would have no issue if social media just like stopped. It just fell off the wagon tomorrow, because my life wouldn't change. But I would say probably 80-90% of the bodybuilding community would just fall away. And I think it also runs deeper, that people compete because it helps them stay relevant, because they need to be, for want of a better term, they need to feel seen. They need to feel like they're involved in something, which again is an external motivator. It's not intrinsic. It's not a good way to go. But I think I've said what I need to say on that.
Yeah.
I think we're both on the same page there. Motivation's internal. It always has been.
You're still training 6 days a week, like we spoke last time, I guess?
At the moment, I do 4 or 5 weight sessions, and I occasionally do some light cardio on the other days off. If I'm in a contest prep, particularly towards the end, I try and make sure that I'm active every day. So I'll not be in the gym training. I'll still only be training 4 or 5 times a week with weights, but I'm a lot more active on a contest prep on my rest days, for example, things like that. I'm a lot more active in general, because you need to increase your output. But training's the same, Kenny, absolutely. Ed Cohen, the greatest powerlifter of all time, he had a great saying once: show me someone who's never been injured and I'll show you someone who's never won anything. If you're not training with high enough intensity and then you suddenly increase that intensity or volume massively, I would challenge anyone to know where that line is. And that's why I had a linear improvement for the entire time I was competing.